Hey, this is Awkward. I'm back with the Awkward interviews. I have Emily Galvin-Almanza, and we got right into talking about some, everything Emily says is right on. So I'm excited for this interview. I'm just going to introduce her, and then we'll go right back to talking about what we were talking about before I hit record, which is what's going on right now with the storm, being this surprise down south and how it impacts specific communities more than others, and how, some are prepared and some are not. It's probably all related to climate change and things happening unexpectedly that for generations we hadn't experienced. So let me introduce Emily. She's a graduate of Harvard University and Stanford Law School. That's pretty ridiculous. Where she
Totally
earned,
ridiculous.
I mean, yeah, come on. Not most people I interview
Does that.
don't have that background. It's incredible. And also she earned the Deborah Road Prize for her work in the public interest. Emily has also been named one of the American Bar Association's top 40 young lawyers. That was in 2017. She served as a public defender in California and New York. That's something I definitely want to talk about, because public defenders in general are unsung heroes in this system and completely overworked, generally speaking. Emily has worked to protect people both facing charges as well as people returning home from incarceration. She was at the Stanford Three Strikes Project. It's a really important cause. It was one of the first attorneys bringing post-reform petitions for relief on behalf of individuals sentenced to life under California's Three Strikes law. We had similar Rockefeller drug laws that I helped lobby against in New York. It's insane the ways there are people in prison for decades for, in one case that always stuck with me, stealing a piece of pizza. Often due to poverty, they may have committed a couple other minor offenses before that, and that's all it takes. She was also with the Bronx Defenders, and I'm going to ask her about this. As she puts it, this role helped her understand the power of holistic defense and the importance of protecting people in need across legal disciplines. So I'm curious what holistic defense really means. Emily has published articles on alternatives to incarceration and anti-recidivism strategies in Slate and The Atlantic and elsewhere. She's now the anchor of The Appeal Live. And she's the founder and executive director of Partners for Justice. It's an incredibly unique and transformative program which trains non-attorney advocates to work inside the legal systems that, she and I both are looking to transform. These advocates provide their clients with person-to-person legal support, and they also help public defenders protect people from incarceration and other penalties. Emily clearly understands the interconnectedness of, all of the issues facing criminalized communities. It's not just mass incarceration and police brutality. Her organization helps fight eviction, prevent family separations, maintain employment, and retrieve seized property. So it's a lot of incredible work. And from what I understand right now, amid this storm, not only are their clients suffering, but her employees or her team members are as well. So Emily, thank you for joining me. And let's start with what's going on right now.
Thank you so much for having me. And credit where it's due. I'm the co-founder and co-executive director. I have an amazing partner. Our program is collaborative on all levels, including collaborative leadership. So I don't want to leave her out or take her credit.
That's my bad.
No. It's cool. It's like who has co-founders and co-executive directors? We just do everything together. We've been friends since first grade.
That's very cool. What's her name?
Rebecca Solo. She brings the business half, the organizational. She's an MBA, former nonprofit management consultant. I'm a public defender, so I know how to get people out of cages. I don't know how to start businesses.
Yeah,
we're a perfect team.
Totally. That's smart.
But turning to Texas for a second, I'm really glad you asked, because the weather crisis we're seeing right now, it's absolutely one where like our team members who are often, low income, sometimes personally system impacted themselves. Often this is their first job out of college, working for a public defender through Partners for Justice. So we're very, very concerned about getting our team members safe first. We're affixing our own oxygen masks before we help others. So we're hoping to get people into hotels if they need it, and out of freezing, powerless apartments. But then the next step, of course, is figuring out what we can do for our clients. And I think this is actually a great lens through which to talk about the sort of overall theory of why we do this, right? Because you and I are both in this moment where like everyone's trying to fix criminal justice with like tech and like media and policy, which I also like do stuff in, and that's cool and that's great. That's really important. But when a crisis happens overnight, like a massive storm wipes out power in a community that is completely not ready for cold weather, and community members don't know how to keep themselves safe because this is not their natural climate. It's more important to have people on the ground because there's nothing smarter, faster, or more flexible than a human brain. And that's kind of the general bet that we're making with Partners for Justice, right? Which is like, you can fix something with a human being better than you can fix it with an app. Human problems are complex. As you and I both know, if somebody gets arrested, they may spend 48 hours in jail, but during that time they could lose their job. Without the job, they can't make rent. Then the apartment is gone. Being in a shelter increases your likelihood of having a child services intervention. You might lose your kid. Certainly property could be seized. Like a person's entire web of stability that they may have fought very hard to construct can disappear through one simple contact with the system. And those problems are not, it's not like just an employment problem. It's not like just a housing problem. What's happening in Texas right now is not just a weather problem. It's a problem that triggers this cascade of impact across someone's entire life. The only thing smart enough to begin to push back on that and help people stabilize is an actual human partner. So our bet was that we should put humans into the field instead of anything else. And we're also betting that it's a great, experience for the people doing the job. I like to say I was a public defender because I'm selfish. Like I just really like fighting the man and helping people. And I really like getting people out of cages and trying to help them emerge with their lives as unscathed as possible. So it's totally a selfish act for me. Like I do it because I have fun and I love it. And I hope that Partners for Justice is creating work like that for young people and people who are early stage professionals and aren't usually given access to that kind of transformative power. But yeah, what we're seeing in Texas is another example of why it's important to have human flexibility as opposed to a more strictly categorized or cabined or like bucketed program.
Yeah. And the way you put it is great. It's the perfect kind of selfishness. And I actually wrote a paper on this years ago, arguing that there's no such thing as true altruism and that that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you benefit in doing the work and the things that make you happy help others, then that's okay. It's good to be selfish if that's your
If we ever get to a world where people are having to be altruistic without deriving any joy from it, that's like a terrible world. And I don't want to live in that world.
Yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely. And I totally am selfish as well, right? Like if I can get someone media attention to help their cause, to get them out of prison, that makes me feel good. When I spent time at Greenhaven Maximum Security Prison in New York, just kind of lending an ear to incarcerated people and telling them things going on outside that they didn't know about, that made them feel good, and it clearly also made me feel good, and I like to think I would do it anyway if it made me unhappy. But again, there's nothing wrong with getting joy from doing something positive. Tell me more about your work with Partners for Justice. How does the process actually work? Like how could someone join, and then how does someone in need get looped in, and what is the work that is actually done to help maintain or build this safety net for people?
I am very glad you asked. So basically it's like this. I started out as a public defender at like a very traditional county public defender agency. Most public defender agencies, when they are institutional, they're county or state agencies. They're government agencies. And they're under-resourced and overworked. And public defenders are accustomed to fighting for everything and getting nothing. And that's kind of like the theme of the job. But after my time with the Three Strikes Project, I'd really missed being in court. I really missed trials. And my husband and I, he's also a public defender, moved out to the Bronx Defenders because we'd heard about this thing called holistic defense, which is the idea that you shouldn't be defending a case, you should be defending a person. And that person's needs and priorities may be really different from what the case dictates, right? Like you may be so concerned with this person's misdemeanor trespassing case, but their number one concern may be getting their car back, which was taken, at the time they were arrested. So following that person's priorities, that person's needs, being able to provide them with seamless access to wraparound collaborative services, social workers, housing lawyers, family defenders, immigration lawyers, investigators, all collaborating with criminal defense attorneys under one roof in this like one-stop shop, amazing place where people can get tremendous support. And the kind of let's be real, the kind of wraparound team you would have if you were a wealthy, privileged person encountering the legal system. That is what they provide at Bronx Defenders. I moved out there to try and learn from it and do it. Sorry, my husband's phone is ringing. I don't know if you can hear it in the other room.
Right.
Sorry about that.
If we get through this interview without a dog barking, a cat meowing,
don't have a dog, only a toddler. And she has the discipline not to make noise. My husband, I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I was at Bronx Defenders reflecting on what it was like to work in a county agency.
Right.
And thinking, my God, I want every public defender in the country to be able to say to their client, yeah, we can, I don't know how to do a housing case, but my colleague totally does. And let me just walk you over to his desk and again, make it seamless, because when you're dealing with the challenges of poverty and 40 bureaucracies you're supposed to be interacting with and a criminal case, like family, it's too hard to ask people to go to 6 different locations to get help. So, and again, rich people wouldn't have to. So I think what I'm trying to build is the kind of wraparound legal team you would have if you're a billionaire in the legal system.
That's incredible.
But looking around me there, I was like, okay, what could I take from here? Obviously, the county agencies at which I worked would never be able to afford, or at least not in the near term, the full suite of collaborative employees that a nonprofit like Bronx Defenders can raise money for. But there's this one player who's not an attorney. We attorneys often think that attorneys are the most important people. They're not. A non-attorney who is smart and tenacious and creative and flexible, like the kind of person who will just camp out in front of the DMV until they get what they want out of those bureaucrats inside. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes a person who is an early stage professional. That could be someone who's a recent college grad, or kind of at that stage. We can come to early stage professionalism at any age, right? But somebody who's figuring out where their arc goes. And I thought, if you empower and train these brilliant non-attorneys to say yes to clients, whatever it is, you need benefits help, yes. You need housing help, yes. You need, to prep for a child services visit, yes. And if we don't know how to do it, if we can't do it, if it's something like a real eviction hearing and we need a lawyer, we will be trained to convince other people to help, to have seamless referral networks. We can leverage the legal ecosystem of a jurisdiction. And by using this one brilliant, collaborative, creative player, we can make the client feel like they're getting a one-stop shop, even if we are organizing 6 different organizations to work on their behalf. So they feel like they come to the public defender and get everything, when in fact, we're calling civil legal services, we're calling a shelter, we're calling a drug treatment program, we're calling whatever's necessary. So I reached out to my best, my friend from first grade. It was like, I don't know how to start businesses. And she had been working in global health and was very eager to jump into something as challenging and messed up as the legal system, the criminal legal system. And so we started recruiting college grads, thinking this also could be a bridge program, right? For kids who haven't had the red carpet rolled out and might want to go to an amazing law school or become a journalist or run for office someday. We thought we can leverage our personal networks, make this a really rewarding work experience for 2 years, and build this talent network. We'll embed them inside public defender offices. Public defenders don't have to pay for any of the training, the recruiting, the coaching. We coach every advocate one-on-one every other week. Technical assistance that we can provide on how to implement this program. Public defenders don't pay for any of that. The only money they have to put in is the cost of actually employing and providing benefits to the advocates themselves. So it's really cost effective for public defenders. It's really effective for their clients. The way it works is the advocates work at the PD's office. They're embedded. We train the attorneys on how to collaborate, how to send referrals, how to spot a referral, because oftentimes if you're a lawyer and you're so traumatized by not being able to offer help outside of criminal law, you like don't want to talk about it because you don't want to get into subject matter you can't help with. So we rehabilitate the attorneys until they can ask about like food stamps and housing. And we train the advocates to work across this really broad array of subject matter. We build relationships with local orgs in the jurisdiction to collaborate with us. So for the client, when they come in, maybe they have an issue that's not a legal issue, but that's something really important that they need help stabilizing. Their lawyer will then refer them to an advocate. The advocate will work on anything that client needs, and even beyond the end of their criminal case, right? Like your criminal case might get resolved, but you're still working on finding, a mental health treatment support plan that will be functional long-term. So we stick with them as long as they need. And then, of course, as we do all of this work, we are packaging it into mitigation for lawyers. So the goal really is to not just help people walk away unscathed, but to get as many people out as fast as possible. So if somebody's in custody and we're working on treatment support, a reentry plan, family unity, gathering vital documents and getting them hooked up with benefits, we package all of that and present it to the judge and say, hey, you might have thought you shouldn't let this person out because you might have thought they didn't have a plan. Here's a plan you can't ignore. It's an amazing plan. So you should let this person out right now so we can start on a restorative plan. That means we're really good at getting people out of cages. Our clients see significant increases in non-incarceratory dispositions and reductions in jail days. And for the client, it just feels like a one-stop shop. That's it.
I mean, it's honestly a platform I would love to see all over the country for people before they run into legal issues, like, if these types of one-stop shops were available for all people who had needs that were not being met because of all the money spent on policing instead of social services, then there'd be far less interactions with police to begin with and be easier to get rid of the police.
It's really funny because when you look at programs, we started looking at programs like STAR and CAHOOTS and these alternatives to police that don't involve police contact at all. A huge number of our clients are experiencing substance use issues or mental health issues. And police contact can be really dangerous and really destructive, especially, it's dangerous and destructive for everyone, but especially for those clients. And so we started reaching out to like these alternative programs, being like, hey, if we brought our services to your jurisdiction, and let's say somebody's having a mental health crisis and you bring a STAR team, which by the way, if you look at the records of these non-police first responders, they basically never have to call police. I think STAR has had to call police backup in like 1% of their cases. No, I think it's no cases. STAR in Denver, no, they've never had to call for police backup.
That says a lot.
Yeah. So we were like, hey, maybe we can bring our services, and we're still considering going to these jurisdictions. But the funny thing is, because these crisis responders are so good at resolving crises, they never make arrests either. Like there are arrests in like 1% of these responder cases, which is great. It also means that for someone who's criminal justice rooted, we're like pretty irrelevant. But you're totally right that like if we poured money into things that like fit this historic notion of retribution and like this idea of safety that's very violent.
Yes.
And it's weird because in like medicine or science, if you're like building a rocket or making a vaccine, you don't want scientists doing stuff that like feels right to you, right? Like you don't want to be like, well, lavender oil smells great, so we should totally put it in this vaccine and inject it into my body. But in the law, we ignore evidence all the time and do things that are just like these sort of knee-jerk retributive, like police feel good, let's just send armed people. But if we look at the evidence, there's programs that work so much better at actually preventing violence. And it drives me endlessly crazy to watch resources get poured into things that have had decades to be effective and aren't. So yes to what you said.
Yeah. That's the problem with reform, that they, as Angela Davis said, they tend to just strengthen the system. There's always the assumption, like you're saying, that police and prisons are the only solution, or at the very least, some form of retribution or carceral punishment, that, we can do a nicer version of slavery or nicer version of putting someone in full control and surveillance. So, hence, the spread of, ankle monitoring and other forms of, carceral punishment, where people aren't in a cage, but they still feel like they are.
Yeah.
And in many ways, their home becomes a cage. So tell me about, where you stand on defund the police versus the movement to abolish police and prisons. And I ask because, you're someone who has worked in the system for a while, and I think understands more about the intricacies and what these so-called slogans really mean.
Yeah.
People think that, defund the police just means take all the money out of police departments, and don't understand the second part of it, which is to reallocate those funds to the most impacted communities so that the police aren't necessary.
Yeah.
And people assume that abolition is about absence and anarchy, as opposed to the presence of life-affirming, institutions in place of prisons. And then there's the other argument that I hear all the time as a major proponent, obviously, of this, that, we like, it's impossible. If we did that, it would, like, all the lawless people would just run wild. And, I think, there's this misunderstanding that someone like me believes it can and should happen overnight. So what do you believe in terms of all of these things? And what would you say to abolitionists in terms of, like, getting the point across in a better way, so people understand what the real meaning is behind it?
Hello, I'm a white girl from Massachusetts, and living in Massachusetts. I'm gonna tell Black activists on the ground what language they should and should not use. No, I'm not gonna do that.
That's part of the problem.
Yeah.
That's all Black women have been hearing
Totally.
for decades.
Yes.
Like, it's a great concept, but don't use those words.
Oh my God. Yes. No. So, okay. On the words, we're all talking about it. So I guess the words are working. Amazing things are happening. Like I just mentioned, STAR and Cahoots, and amazing initiatives are happening. City and county agencies and governments are being emboldened to reallocate funding in huge ways. So it can't be that bad. It's also not a slogan. It's literally just the description of a demand by like impacted people on the ground. So I try really hard to avoid the whole conversation about the words. I'm not interested in language in that way. I am interested in language generally, but like in this particular instance, I'm interested in very concrete solutions. As you mentioned, there's a huge tension. As someone who has worked and continues to work inside the system, there's this natural, I don't want to say conflict, but it's definitely a tension between having abolitionist beliefs and believing in our own creative power to build replacements for the violent institutions we currently have. And also knowing that every time we go into a court conference room and convince a blood-sucking ankle monitor company to give us a discount so that our client can afford to not be in a cage, we're perpetuating the system. And that's a really, like, obviously toxic example of it. But look at it this way. When a judge orders a person to do impossible things, and we bust our butts to make those things possible, to jump through 16 hoops to get someone, a COVID test in the jail, and then get a new test because that test was delayed, and then use that test to get into a treatment program where we find an inpatient bed, and then explain to probation that the person can't leave the program because they have to stay in or they'll get kicked out. So they can't report to probation 3 times a week, and get probation on board with that, and then go back and help this person get their ID so they can enroll in a GED program and impress the judge with that too. We're telling the judge, what you asked for was possible. It was totally doable. It was fine. We did it. So you can keep asking people for stuff like that. Yeah. And that strengthens and perpetuates the oppression of this system. So
that's why I'm asking you, that's the tough part. I do believe that we need, as we fight toward abolition, we need people like you making the current system as feasible, in a sense, for the people impacted as possible. Because if you didn't do your work, then it would just continue to be as horrific as possible until we succeed.
That's the thing, right? Is like, for people actually, like, are you going to tell the mom, like, this is something that drives me crazy that prosecutors do all the time. Have you ever seen prosecutors do the thing where they like enforce a ridiculous law to the fullest extent to try and demonstrate how ridiculous it is and inspire change? It's like when you watch there was a prosecutor who charged like a 15-year-old girl for taking a naked selfie of herself, and he accused her of manufacturing child porn. And it's like, I'm not willing to be the person who makes a policy point by hurting a human being. And by the same token, like, there are actual human beings who need to be extracted from this framework right now, urgently, millions of people. The flip side, though, the flip side of that harm reduction work with an abolitionist goal is that every time we prove that somebody can be home, removed from the system, and safe, when we support to me, there's like 3 ingredients for safety: making sure people have a place that's safe to live, work or a means of having an income, and any kind of supportive treatment. If they need mental health treatments, and like support, work, house, support. With those 3 ingredients, basically nobody gets into trouble. And proving that point again and again and again with compelling personal stories, and hopefully someday, if I raise the money to do it, with like data on that, that builds that abolitionist vision, right? Because what everybody's so afraid of is like, oh God, we get rid of the police and the prisons, and then there's chaos in the streets, and the CVS is on fire. But the truth is, it's like, no, we support people so that everybody can live the way they do in like suburban West Lynn, Oregon, right? Not to pick on West Lynn, it's affluent. Anyway, that's my feeling of how our harm reduction work contributes. Because you're right, abolition is creative, and you mentioned a second ago whether it's like a gradual thing or an overnight thing. And to speak to that, that's kind of why I don't like talking about the language, because I don't care what we call it at all. What I care about is that programs like STAR and Cahoots are proving themselves to be super effective, and proving that we don't need police in this context. And programs where you invest in people's livelihoods and shelter show that people do a lot better and don't get arrested. Those demonstration projects, to me, that are scalable and actually give people a vision of the infrastructure of abolition, that to me is the most persuasive thing. You're never going to convince people based on arguments.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And it's interesting because when I interviewed Greg McKelvey, who helped run a campaign in Oregon for Sarah I had known, that's not the right way to say it. I said it.
I remember, yes. I think it's Yanoni. Anyway.
I said it right the first time when I talked to him, but anyway, he is a supporter of abolition. And went as far as to say, in a way that some people misunderstood actually, but that defunding doesn't have the value that people think it does if it doesn't lead to abolition. If it, and that's something I actually agree with. It's what I meant when I said that you can't just defund and put the money into another form of carceral punishment or surveillance or whatever. So, but what he said to me was, when he was running his campaign or her campaign, they said something like disinvest or divest from policing. Like they were really careful about the language.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that interesting because the way that I look at it is like, I'm going to be as harsh and demanding and aggressive as possible, because if I call for a 20% defunding, the best I'm going to get is 5%. But if I say I want to abolish police, and I'm starting with your department because half your cops have killed people and the others have let it happen, then they're going to say, whoa, how about we defund by 50% because it's a compromise. So, as much as I think the language debate is a distraction, I'm pretty firm in belief that, that the people who are saying, calm your language down when it's simply defund are way off base if they believe in what I'm talking about.
See, I think we need all of it. Because so I grew up I grew up kind of all over the place, but I spent a lot of time in Iowa. There's like a Midwestern nice thing. It's like Iowa nice is like next level. People can do really evil things in Iowa, but they're always very polite about it.
Like
And
Joe Biden versus Donald Trump.
right? To me, I think you need both, because you need people making really, really bold demands to shift the parameters of the conversation. You're totally right. It's just like bargaining for, anything in buying a table and chair at a street market. Like you start with your really low ball offer. You offer them $5. Yep. I think that you need a second. You need like a collaboration with folks who are going to come and be like, here's something totally reasonable. We're going to be very polite about this, but put forth a very reasonable perspective that's in the middle of the new Overton window that the left flank has created, right? So it's like a little bit, I hate to say good cop, bad cop, but that is what we're talking about. You need somebody making big, bold demands and being the angry voice of protest and honest outrage. And you need people coming in and saying, here's a really constructive solution that you can enact tomorrow. It's scalable. It's safe. Here's the proof of it. Like, just try it. Like, I will be your safe person. Listen to me.
Yes.
And between those two things, you get really good progress. I think when we try to choose between them or like argue with each other over what's better, we lose. This is like our problem on the left is like, we're constantly attacking each other and like thinking people should strategize differently. And we need all of it.
Yes, I totally agree. The amount of leftist infighting is overwhelming. I try not to talk about it because people who aren't on the left can see this also, and they don't need to know that we're not in perfect unity.
They know.
And I also try to avoid the actual arguments. Like I'm not interested in attacking someone's character or telling them what they're doing wrong. I'm focused on what I'm doing. And I totally agree with you that, and I've said it before, like the people who are breaking windows, so to speak, or doing more constructive forms of direct action shouldn't necessarily be the same people who are walking into a boardroom to have a meeting to discuss the actual changes.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about your thoughts on 10 Demands specifically. That's the group that I co-founded last year. And I asked because we consider ourselves abolitionist, obviously, but the 10 demands for justice themselves are a roadmap or a framework toward abolition. So at once we're calling for these bold, long-term goals, but we're also the same group saying these are the specific things that can be done now. So ending qualified immunity, ending cash bail, ending solitary confinement, getting cops out of schools, starting defunding and bringing it down to zero, but starting that now. Yeah. I'm curious what you think about the 10 demands, and then also what do you believe should be the number one priorities for right now? What are things we can change currently?
So first of all, on the 10 demands, what you just mentioned is, I think, the most important thing, which is that it's a path. It's not like a bouquet. It's a primrose path. And I think that's the part where we lose so many of our target audiences. I mean, either that or they're just like totally checked out and like in a police union pocket and not listening. But
yeah,
giving people concrete, actionable steps, ending qualified immunity, ending cash bail, like these things are happening in places. I mean, the QI thing is a bigger challenge, but like ending cash bail, you can't look around and be like, no one's ever done that. It's happening. It's quite clear. I think that is the biggest vulnerability we have in this conversation, though, is because our audience, people who are not comfortable with this, who don't think about it, who don't want to think about it, who have other priorities, who are not personally invested in the lives of folks who are living in prisons. They tend to react with that, like, we can't do it all right now, that's too extreme. And getting them to the point where it's not even a question that this isn't like a tomorrow thing. Like, here are 3 things that are for tomorrow. Here are 3 things that are for the next 5 years. Here are 3 things that are like our long-term vision for the future that we need to work toward. But obviously there's going to be a lot of work to get there, because we don't have the infrastructure to enact the boldest vision tomorrow. I think that's really important. I think it's really challenging when it's easier with a group, but when you have one voice trying to voice the full spectrum, that can be really hard because people are distracted audiences. And remembering that your audience is like not paying attention, not invested, not eager to engage with this, and like probably doing 3 other things right now, makes it hard to get them to pay attention to the full spectrum and not just glom on to like the thing that freaks them out the most. So I think that I'm fully aligned with the strategy of presenting the whole thing at once, but to the extent one gets pushback, like I think that's really part of it, is just we're fighting for attention. I think of my mom as my like target audience. She's amazing. She's, you know, left wing. She's a good listener. She's super smart. But like, she's thinking about climate change. She's thinking about global health. She's thinking about, population and food distribution. She's thinking about so many other things that freak her out so much that like fighting for attention with, we had this conversation about vaccine prioritization in prisons. You know, she's older with health conditions, and she's like, I don't understand why not school teachers? Like, why is this priority important? And getting somebody emotionally there, which she did get there, to like remember that these are mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers, like living in a place that is phenomenally dangerous, inhumane, and violent. Getting people to remember that and prioritize this issue in the face of so much other chaos, that's really hard. So my answer is, you're fighting a good fight in an impossible arena, right?
Wow. Yeah. That's such a good point. Yeah. And I was going to say, until you mentioned like poverty and food distribution, and I know this, this might not be the most popular thought, but like, it sounded like a privilege, like it's a privilege to worry about climate change. On the other hand, we are now actually so close to the whole world blowing up because of climate change that it's the chaos, that is actually, I'm old enough to remember when like it felt like something that didn't have to be a priority. Maybe I'm wrong and I haven't caught up, and it is such a priority now, or we're all going to die. But I always feel like worrying about some of the things you mentioned, and not cops killing 3 people a day, and, us incarcerating 25% of the world's incarcerated people, and they're being, predominantly Black, brown, and poor. Like, I don't, and the homeless population. These are the things that have always stood out to me as the greatest injustices that were priority number one.
No, I agree. So first of all, let me just be very clear about my mom. She is like ride or die on these issues, and she is super. I did not mean to give the impression that my mom was not concerned with the stuff I've devoted my life to. My mom is my like I said, she's my ride or die.
Sounds amazing. This was not really an attack on Emily's mom.
No, I want to be like, my mom's gonna watch this, and I want her to know that like she is her work on this is acknowledged. And but I want to talk about the privilege thing, because I think it's really important. My background is trial lawyering, super different than real lawyering or regular lawyering. Maybe it is real lawyering.
Yeah, what do you mean by real?
What is the scale of lawyers? You kind of get to pick your audience. You don't get to pick your judge. You get a limited selection of jurors. In most places, they're not demographically aligned or don't carry the same identities as your clients, which means that your skill set becomes the skill set of convincing people who are inclined to hate you that they should actually get on your team. I think that's the thing that is hard about engaging with the privilege of people deprioritizing our issue. It is, right? To be in a position where you don't know anybody who's incarcerated, like that's a huge privilege. It's an amazing privilege. And to be also to the point where you don't have an instinct to imagine what someone's going through, having their partner taken away, right? But with the word privilege, so often comes an implied judgment. It's hard to avoid. I mean, I know it's not technically part of that. I mean, we use privilege very technically in these conversations, but like those of us who are on the side of trying to build a team to create change, it's on us to make people care in spite of their privilege, in spite of their life experiences. It's like, I consider it my job not their job. It's not their job to care. It's my job to convince them they should care more about this than about, it's so hard to deprioritize others. Than about, the stock market.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so I feel like I kind of have to not, I try to acknowledge privilege in understanding someone's perspective and their life experience and like where they're coming from, but I try to do it in as accepting and warm a way as I can so that I'm not alienating a potential ally, which is easy for me to do. This is the white girl job, right? Is like the job of talking to people who are going to be privileged and not aligned and like trying to get them on our team. Like, let's not put that on impacted people. Let's not put that on the people who are already doing so much work to get the rest of us to understand things they've lived and experienced. I'm not the best person to talk about a lot of stuff. My life experience and my identities don't carry a lot of the impact of people who are working on this, but I can happily jump on the grenade of, addressing privilege in a way that is as inclusive and persuasive as possible.
Wow, that's really well said. So what do you think are, the biggest issues facing public defenders today, and what can we do about it?
Oh my God. Okay, so this is a really exciting moment in public defense. Public defense, here's why it's exciting. It's been under-resourced and badly kept up for so long because people thought of public defenders as something other, as something someone else might need, as something that's sort of the lowest rung on the totem pole, even though it's a constitutionally mandated service. Public defenders have had incredibly high caseloads and at no money for decades. But in the awakening in this country around the incarceration crisis and around policing, people have started to see public defenders as heroic, which by and large, they actually are. Like, yes, there are bad dump truck public defenders. I'm not going to pretend they don't exist. But like, by and large, the people who amass law school debt, and then they're like, you know what? I'm going to carry all this debt and get paid no money to spend a lot of time in jails and a lot of time getting smacked around in court and losing even though I'm right. I mean, that's like, who does that other than like deeply driven, passionate people who believe in justice and liberty? So yeah, I think this is a moment when we are having a national awakening about this. Resources are beginning to melt. I think of it as sort of like a glacial shifting from the carceral state toward the actors who carry out policies of liberation and restoration. A lot of times that means community orgs, but a lot of times it means public defenders and public defenders who are trying cool things. That's something I love about my program right now is, we started out in 2 cities. We grew to 5 cities within a couple of years. We're going to be in at least 8 places, not all cities. We're going to the consolidated Salish and Kootenai tribes of Montana this year. So not all cities, very excited to have a rural office. We're seeing suddenly the county and state governments that fund these agencies be interested in empowering them to do more, be interested in them as a resource and as a form of first responder, right? Because I mean, you have to imagine public defenders impact like 20% of the low-income population in any given jurisdiction. And it is the 20% who is the most jeopardized, who's in the hardest position, whose life is the most in peril. So it's like the emergency room of law. And the fact that big foundations, big donors, like people who did not care about public defense 2 years ago, care now and will put resources toward it. That's tremendously exciting to me. I wouldn't be doing this work if I didn't think I could amass the resources to make it national and to make this the next Teach for America size huge program until we all become obsolete because we've dismantled the whole complex. So I think that what people can do, I'm glad you asked that question. If people are wealthy or working for foundations, they can pour money towards public defenders. If people are working for county and state governments, they can include, more room in their budget, maybe move a little of that police funding over to the defense side and remember how restorative a great public defender can be. Remember that the only person who's legally protected to know the truth of what a person is struggling with is their public defender. There's no other actor of the system who has legal confidentiality where you can say, like, you can really be honest with me. I can't tell anyone, like, let's really talk about what you're struggling with, what you need. So if people are just ordinary people who are listening to this and care about this, go to Board of Supervisors meetings, go to your county, whatever your city council, whoever the funding agency is, go and fight for your public defenders. go and say, hey, the public defender has made this budget request. Keep an eye on what they're looking for. I want my government to pour resources into public defenders because they keep everybody safe. When they help people stabilize, they make us all safer. Writing about, being interested in, amplifying, giving platforms to public defenders, that is all speeding this cultural transformation where we're going from like a Dick Wolf world, like carceral Mariska Hargitay, to a world where, the heroes are people who create liberty.
Wow, that's really cool. I wasn't really even aware of the shift because to me, public defenders were always the heroes. And I guess I just wasn't in enough to see that. So that's a really positive thing. And I've never heard it put this way before that, I always understood their role as defending people who have been charged with crimes. You're like the holistic concept and, seeing, this full suite of services and like the public defender's position as like the protector of the people who are likely to be charged with crimes. It really just does, one, give me hope and also just place so much more importance on the things you're saying, supporting public defenders. What are your plans as like, for the organization specifically? I want to see you guys, in every city, as I've already said, I think. So, what's next for the organization and this model of like, the web of protective services?
Yeah, so we're growing right now. We're actually recruiting our 2021 class. We expect to be sending new advocate teams to Houston, Miami, probably some new California counties, definitely Montana, but we are only recruiting tribal affiliates for that role. We feel very strongly about our advocates sharing identities with their client population because peer support is the best support.
You got to tell me more about that too.
Yeah, it's super cool. The tribal defender is interested in creating holistic defense, which would be the first real holistic model in the state. And if it works on the reservation, they're talking about possibly using it as a model for elsewhere. It's also our first rural office. I mean, rural defense is really different than city defense. When the resources you need for your clients are like 50 miles away and your client doesn't have a car, like it's a new challenge. So we're going for transportation grants. We're going for, we're begging certain companies that do forms of taxi service to try and give us a little help.
Yeah.
Looking for, ways we can purchase large scale bus passes and stuff for our clients. Anyway, long term, I mean, we would like to see this be available everywhere. We would like to live in a world where it doesn't matter what your bank account says, or even if you don't have a bank account. If you need the kind of defense that would be afforded Lindsay Lohan in the early aughts, we want that wraparound, sensitive, responsive, also like dignified wraparound team. We're very clear. We don't work on people. We work for people. Our clients are our bosses. We're not going to try to fix anybody. We're going to listen to our clients' goals and try to achieve them. I want that to be available everywhere. It's going to be hard because there's like 3,000 counties in America, and some of them don't even have institutional public defenders. So finding ways to create this resource in new spaces, it's going to be a big deal. In the meantime, though, I mean, right now we're applying for funding to bring this service to Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a quarter. California is our most populous state, 40 million people. A quarter of them, 10 million, live in LA County. The LA County Public Defender is the oldest and biggest public defender in the nation. They work in over 30 courthouses across the county. They serve like 300,000 people annually. If we could have advocates available to every one of those clients in one of the most hyper-policed, frankly, deeply racially policed jurisdictions in the country, it would be a very different world for the kid who is 14 in Compton and has already had police contact pretty much every week for the last 7 years. Right. So that's the dream.
Well, that would be incredible. Yeah. I mean, what we see, it seems at least every week with the sheriff's department, the LAPD, it is constant. And the research says that interactions with police, lead to future criminality. So if you are in LA where you're, like you said, dealing with them constantly, or you're in New York City where you're stopped and frisked every time you leave your house, like it's almost impossible not to end up in the system, whether you've, and that's another thing, like we all have probably committed crimes. There's a lot of laws out there, like whether it's jaywalking or something else, like
if you've ever yelled at your romantic partner too hard, I mean, or your mom, I remember defending cases in California where somebody had yelled at like someone who was driving them a bit batty, I'm gonna effing kill you. And they did not mean it. But that's actually a strike felony in California. Like that's people who say they've never committed a felony. I'm like, let's really dig in here because I bet I can find a felony you've committed.
Yep, exactly. And the population of those deemed criminal versus those who've committed a felony is very different.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's what do you remember there was like reporting on like moms smoking weed and they were all white moms and no one had a child services intervention? It was like the New York Times did this, like moms say that smoking weed makes them better moms. It's just like this series of like white women from Brooklyn who are never going to be policed or intervened upon for this. And then you walk into family court in the Bronx and you just want to throw yourself off a bridge. And it's just like, yeah, we got a long way to go.
Yeah, we do. And we just saw that in New Jersey too, that they've arrested 6,000 people since the state voted to legalize marijuana. 6,000 people for petty possession, all now in the system for something that others are making millions off of.
Yeah, I can buy marijuana stocks right now. I can get on my phone and like buy. There's actually there's an electronically traded fund for it. And we live in this world where the people who are buying those stocks are like pretending that there's not still enforcement happening against Black and brown people everywhere, even in legalized states. It's crazy.
It is crazy. Is there anything else that you want to share with my audience before I let you go?
Yeah, I guess this is so cheesy, but just like, don't get tired, or rather get tired and lean into it. We're all going to get tired. It is going to be a long, we're a lot better off now than we were 2 years ago. we got a better audience in the federal government and a lot of state governments. Brian Stevenson talks about how you got to get tired. Obviously in his work, which is trying to save lives and losing much of the time, he's got a different definition of tired, but we all have to acknowledge that this is exhausting. It is emotionally exhausting. It's painful. But we can't give up because we're finally getting traction. It's that moment when you're trying to drive your car out of a ditch and you feel the wheels start to stick, right? And you might be tired. You might have had to shovel a lot of sand or kitty litter under those tires to get out of that ditch, but we're there. The tires are gripping. Like we got to all just keep going. And if you are listening to this as an early stage professional who wants to do radical direct service work, Partners for Justice is recruiting right now. Our applications close this spring, so it's a good time to go to our website, which is partnersforjustice.org, and hit me up for a cool opportunity.
Yeah, I fully support that. If you have this, I wish I was, I don't know, 20 years younger, I'd be on that. But thank you so much, Emily. I really appreciate your time and all of your thoughts on this stuff. You do amazing work. And, hopefully we see it in LA and then everywhere else pretty soon.
This is the most fun I've had in ages. So thank you for having me. This has been great.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care.
Bye.